You ever hear about those old lighthouses way out at sea? The ones nobody visits anymore, just standing there in the fog, blinking into the darkness? Well, one of them isn't as empty as people think. This story comes from a Coast Guard officer who swears it happened for real. His name's Caleb, and what he saw out there still keeps him up at night. Caleb had been in the Coast Guard for over a decade. He wasn't the type to believe in ghosts or legends, just a quiet, practical guy who fixed things and followed orders. But back in 2018, he got sent on a maintenance run to a lighthouse off the coast of Washington State, near a rocky island called Greyhaven Rock. You can't reach it by car, only by boat. No signal, no power grid, just waves, wind, and isolation. Usually these lighthouse checks were solo missions. But because of some weird electrical malfunctions the year before, they sent 2 men this time, Caleb and another technician named Harris. For the first few days, everything was normal. Cold, boring, repetitive. They worked during the day, cleaned the beacon, tested the generator. At night, they'd play cards and listen to the ocean. Until the 4th night, Caleb woke up around 2 a.m., feeling off. The air in the room was heavy, like before a thunderstorm, but outside the sky was perfectly clear. Then he realized the beacon light wasn't moving. That was serious. So he woke Harris, and they climbed the spiral stairs to check it out. When they opened the casing, they found something jammed in the gears, a soaked, dark piece of cloth. It smelled like old seawater and rot. They tossed it out the window, thinking it was just debris carried by the wind. But the next night, it happened again. Same time, 2 a.m. The beacon stopped. Another piece of cloth jammed inside. This time a red scarf, frayed and dripping wet, with tiny shells stuck to it, like it had just come from the ocean floor. That's when Caleb said the place started to feel wrong. They began locking every door, blocking the stairwell with crates. But on the 7th night, Caleb woke up to the sound of whispering. It was Harris, except he wasn't talking to Caleb. He was whispering to the corner of the room. When Caleb asked what he was saying, Harris just stared at him, confused, and said he hadn't said anything. Later that same night, Caleb found him standing at the window, staring down at the rocks below. Harris said he'd seen someone there the night before, a figure just standing still at the edge of the beacon light. And when the light rotated back, it was gone. After that, Harris started changing. He stopped sleeping. He said he could hear footsteps inside the walls and voices calling his name from the stairwell. Then on the 9th night, they both heard it. Real, deliberate footsteps coming down from the beacon room. Not the wind, not creaking. Actual footsteps. They froze, listened, and then silence. That night, they barricaded the door and slept with knives by their beds. By the 11th night, the beacon had stopped again. They climbed up to the top of the tower, and the door to the beacon room was wide open. The wind howled through. Inside the giant beacon bulb, that heavy industrial one, had been completely unscrewed and placed upright in the center of the floor. Caleb said his blood went cold. He turned around to tell Harris, and that's when he felt it. Something cold brushed his shoulder. He spun around. No one there. Harris was pale as a ghost, pointing at the wall, whispering that he saw a hand coming out of the bricks. They ran, locked themselves in the lower quarters, and waited for dawn. At sunrise, Caleb called for an emergency pickup, claiming a critical systems failure. The rescue crew arrived that afternoon, but when they were hauled aboard, the captain asked them about something strange, a distress call they'd supposedly made at 2:07 a.m. that morning. Caleb swore he hadn't touched the radio. The crew said they'd received a transmission, mostly static. But through it, a man's voice said, "There's someone here with us." Then it cut out. Harris quit the Coast Guard 2 months later. Caleb still works maintenance, but he says he'll never go back to Greyhaven Rock. My friend Eli has been with the Coast Guard for more than 10 years. He's not a dramatic guy. The opposite, really. Quiet, rational, and the kind of person who believes there's always a logical reason for everything. That's why this story still gives me chills, because Eli doesn't scare easily. He told me what happened back in 2018 when he and another officer, Mark, were sent on a 2-week rotation to service a remote lighthouse off the coast of Nova Scotia. The place was called Greyweather Point, and it's about as far from civilization as you can get. A jagged strip of rock surrounded by cold, endless sea. No power grid, no plumbing, and only a single generator to keep the light running. Normally, the site is automated, but sometimes they send a small crew to check the mechanics and refuel the system. It's a boring, routine job, except this time, it wasn't. The first few days went as expected. Cold wind, mechanical noise, and the monotonous rhythm of isolation. They checked the beacon motor, replaced old cables, tested the emergency batteries. When the sun went down, they'd eat, read a bit, and crash early. Nothing strange until the 4th night. Eli woke up around 2:15 a.m. The air felt wrong, heavy and electric, like the sky before a thunderstorm, except there wasn't a cloud out there. Then he noticed something else. The beacon light wasn't rotating. The whole purpose of the lighthouse, that sweeping beam, had frozen. He shook Mark awake, and they climbed the narrow iron staircase to the top. The gears were still turning, but something had jammed the light. It was a piece of fabric, black, slimy, soaked in seawater, and tangled deep inside the rotating mechanism. The smell was awful, like rotting kelp and mildew. They pulled it out and tossed it outside into the wind, chalking it up to some freak accident. Maybe seabirds, maybe debris, whatever. But the next night it happened again. Same time, same jam. But this time, it wasn't the same cloth. It was red, smaller, and frayed at the edges like an old scarf. When they pulled it free, they noticed it had tiny shells and bits of coral attached, as if it had just been pulled from the ocean. That was when Eli started feeling uneasy. They checked every door and window, all locked from the inside. No signs of entry, no birds, nothing that made sense. From that night on, they began sealing the stairwell and locking every hatch before bed. Still, both men couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. On the 7th night, Eli was half asleep when he heard Mark mumbling across the room. At first, he thought Mark was talking in his sleep, but the tone didn't sound right. It sounded like a conversation, soft, uneven, as if he were replying to someone standing in the corner. When Eli asked who he was talking to, Mark blinked and said, "What are you talking about?" He claimed he hadn't said a word. The next night, Eli woke up again to find Mark sitting by the window, staring down at the rocks below. He said he saw someone out there, a person standing in the surf, motionless, staring back up at the tower. When the beam of the lighthouse swung past, the figure vanished. From then on, Mark changed. He stopped sleeping, stopped talking, and would spend hours watching the ocean through the glass. He started saying he could hear footsteps in the stairwell or voices coming from inside the walls. On the 9th night, Eli heard it too. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming down the stairs from the beacon room above, one after another. Not the creaks of wind or settling metal, real heavy steps. He and Mark froze. Neither of them had gone up there. And when the sound stopped, the silence that followed was worse. That night, they shoved a dresser against the door and slept with knives under their pillows. By the 11th night, Eli was exhausted. He woke up again around 2 a.m. to total darkness. The beacon had failed once more, but this time the door to the light chamber was wide open, swinging in the wind. When they climbed up, the bulb, a massive industrial lens, had been unscrewed and placed upright in the middle of the floor, like someone had deliberately removed it. That's when Eli felt it. Something cold brushed the back of his neck. He spun around, but no one was there. Mark, pale as a sheet, pointed toward the far wall and whispered, "I saw a hand come out of the bricks." They ran downstairs and locked themselves in the room until daylight. Mark was shaking, whispering to someone who wasn't there. The next morning, Eli used the emergency sat phone to call for extraction, saying they had serious mechanical issues. The rescue crew arrived that afternoon, but when they did, the captain asked about the distress call they'd made earlier. At 2:07 a.m., Eli swore he hadn't touched the radio since the day before. The message they received was just static and one broken sentence. "Someone's here, with us." Mark quit the Coast Guard 3 months later. He never spoke about what happened again. Eli still takes assignments, but whenever he passes that part of the coast, he refuses to even look toward Greyweather Point. And he says he still dreams about that night. The sound of footsteps coming down from the tower, and the faint smell of salt and rot that follows him every time he wakes up. Some stories stay with you, not because of what was seen, but because of what was never explained. This one came from my old friend Ian, a man who swore he'd seen everything the sea could throw at him. But after what happened in that lighthouse off the Washington coast, he never worked near water again. Ian was a marine contractor, the kind of guy who could fix anything that broke near the shoreline. Docks, bridges, generators, you name it. He'd been a diver, an inspector, even done classified work for the Coast Guard. He wasn't the kind of man who scared easily. But in 2013, that changed. He was hired by the county to inspect an old, decommissioned lighthouse sitting on a rocky island about an hour off the mainland. No docks, no electricity, just stone, rust, and silence. They wanted to know if it could be restored or if it was beyond saving. He'd go out there alone for 4 days. Food, tools, a sleeping bag, and a marine radio. Simple job, easy money. When he arrived, the place was exactly what he expected. Quiet, cold, and forgotten. The spiral staircase still stood strong, though the floors were warped and the windows crusted with salt. He set up camp on the ground floor near the generator room, where it was warmest. That first night was calm, almost too calm. No birds, no waves, not even wind. Just silence so thick it felt like pressure on his chest. The second morning, the fog rolled in, thick, milky, like a wall. He couldn't see more than a few feet outside. While checking the upper staircase, he noticed something strange. A maintenance closet he hadn't been able to open the day before was now cracked open. Inside, in the dark, sat a small wooden box, covered in moss, as if it had been underwater for years. He left it alone, just wrote a note and shut the door. That night, he woke up to footsteps, not scurrying animals, human footsteps. Slow, measured, on the metal stairs above him. But they weren't coming down, they were going up. He stared at the stairwell for what felt like hours. Eventually, it went silent again. He told himself it was nothing. That's what you do when you're alone. You explain things away. The next day, he searched the place, top to bottom. Everything was as before, except that box. It was now sitting halfway into the stairwell, damp, heavy, and nailed shut. He picked it up, felt the weight, and decided not to force it open. He set it by the stairs and stepped outside for air. That's when he saw them. Footprints, bare feet, dozens of them, circling the lighthouse and leading straight toward the cliff's edge. And then they stopped. No return prints, just gone. By nightfall, he'd barricaded the door and wedged a metal pipe across the stairwell. Around 1:30 a.m., the upper hatch slammed shut. The entire tower shook. Then, 3 knocks, slow, heavy, from inside the wall. Not at the door, not the window, inside. Ian said it felt like someone was standing behind the plaster, knocking from the other side. When the sun came up, the box was gone. The closet, wide open. He called for extraction, claiming it was a medical issue, but the fog never lifted. He waited on the ledge for nearly 7 hours, hearing faint footsteps crunching behind him in the gravel, though he saw nothing but white. When the rescue boat finally arrived, the deckhand said he looked like a man who'd seen a ghost. Ian just muttered one thing: seal that place. Don't send anyone back. He never worked another job at sea, Within a year, he retired completely. When I asked what really happened out there, he said something that stuck with me ever since. Some places don't want to be found. They just need to be left alone.